Hey everybody, welcome back. In this video we're going to go over exceptions and syntax errors, the difference between them, and how to handle them. So if I want to quick write a small program that's actually going to function correctly, I could put number equals, and we're going to want to make this an int since it's a number. We're going to ask for some input, and we'll say enter a number. And we're going to put \n so that we can have it go to a new line. And then we're going to put print number. Now if I run this, it's going to say enter a number. And if I hit 5, it's going to print 5, and that's it. That's the end of the program. But let's say I did a typo when I was in here, and I accidentally have a space here. When I run it, I'm going to get something called a syntax error, and it says invalid syntax. What's nice about PyCharm is it is showing me the error right here, and it is showing me that the syntax error is at this n, and all a syntax error is basically a typo in your code, or if you have a command typed in incorrectly, like if you don't have the correct parameters or something of that nature. So by me fixing that, that would fix the syntax error. Syntax errors are really simple to fix, and PyCharm makes them so much easier because it even tells me here that it was on line 1. Because see, if I would do it here and I would run it, it'll tell me it's on line 2, and it shows me right where it's at. So it's really nice how PyCharm takes care of that for you and shows you where your syntax error is. But now, what is an exception? Well, there's another kind of error where if I asked for an integer and somebody entered a string, it would be called an exception. So let me show you what I mean. If we go back to number equals and I make that an int again like I'm supposed to, and I go enter a number. Let me put the \n, and then I'll go print number again like I did before, and I go like this and I run it. But I type out 5 instead of actually put 5. You're going to see something here where it says traceback, and it's going to say a value error. This value error right here is actually the exception. That's the name of the exception, is a value error. That's the type of exception that it is. And then it tells you what's wrong. It says invalid literal for int with base 10 5. So basically it's saying you have an invalid integer because you typed in 5 instead of the number 5. So again, if I run the program again and I would just enter a 5, you'll see that it works correctly. So there's a couple ways to handle this, and it's important to look at a program that you're designing and think, can the user create an error, and if so, how can I handle it? Because you don't want your software to be glitchy, and you don't want your software to crash. So I'm going to show you something called try. We're going to do this, and then I'm going to show you how to handle the exceptions. So if I do while true, oops, helps if I can spell, while true, and now what true is called a Boolean, or Boolean, I always say it wrong, and that a Boolean is basically true or false. So we're saying while true, then we're going to do something called try. And basically we're telling it, try to do this code and see if it works. So if I go number equals int input, and I go enter a number, and then I go print, we'll do we'll just print the number for now, and I'll show you something else with it later. So we'll just go print number, and then break, because if it does work, I want to get out of here because it always is done at that point. After that, it's done. So I want to break out of this loop. So break, remember, gets you out of the loop. So because everything executed correctly, we're just going to break out. Now, let's handle that exception. So the exception we had was called a value error. So if I type except and I type val and the V here, you'll see right away value error comes up. So if I go except value error, and I can put a colon, and then print please only enter an integer. And what that's going to do is while this while loop is running, it's going to try this code. If somebody types in 5, it's going to skip this code because it didn't work, and it's going to go down here to the except value error. Now if somebody actually types in the number 5, this code's going to work, so it's just going to break out of the loop and the program's going to be done. So let me show you what I mean. So I can still enter a number and it's done, just like before. But if I do it again and I type 5, it's going to say please only enter an integer instead of actually bringing up that value error this time, because I told it what to do when there's a value error. So now let's look at how we can handle another exception. Let's say if we wanted to take this number and we wanted to just take it and go, I don't know, 4 divided by number. So if I run this again and I hit 2, it's going to give me 2 because 4 divided by 2 is 2. But what happens if I run this and I type 0? Well, now I get another error. And the reason for that is you can't divide by 0. But this time it doesn't say value error, it says 0 division error. So it's still an exception, and it's telling me right where the exception is still. And it's telling me what's wrong. It says division by 0. You can't divide by 0. So how can we handle that? Well, we can do another except line here. We can go except 0 division error, and you see it brought it up there for me. That was real nice. I can go print sorry you can't divide by 0. Okay, so now if I run it again and this time I put 0, it's going to handle it the same way it did for the value error, and it's going to go back and ask me to enter a number again. So now if I type 5, it's going to say please only enter an integer. So then I'll enter the integer and it's done. So there's only one more thing. Well, actually there's 2 more things I want to show you. If you don't know what errors there could be, what exception errors, there's a way to do it with a broad range of exceptions where you don't have to spell out each one, and you can just put except. And then when you do that, you could just put print something went wrong, but you don't know what it is, so you can't tell them exactly what it was. So at that point you could break out of the loop and say that's it and the program, or you could just have it go back and try the code again. So that's how you would handle any exceptions that aren't listed. I don't recommend this as it doesn't tell the person exactly what's wrong. So if you're going to make a program like this and you're going to say, well, there's only really 2 errors. There could be a value error and a 0 division error. I would suggest to do each line of code to handle those individual errors instead of just doing something like this and they're like, well, that's great, but what went wrong? And then the last thing I want to show you is you can put finally. And what finally is whether it runs the try code or it runs an exception, finally will always run. So for instance, if I put finally print this is the end of the loop, and I go like this and I hit play and I hit 5, it's going to say this is the end of the loop. But if I do it again and it gets one of those exception errors, oops, it's still going to say this is the end of the loop, because it's always going to show this at the end, whether it was the successful code or the exception. Finally is always going to put this is the end of the loop, and finally can say anything. I just happen to put that this is the end of the loop there. And you'll see that even though it printed that, because there was an exception, it's still going back and running the loop again, and then I'll hit 5 and there it did. There did it again. It printed it. So that's exceptions and syntax errors, and now you should understand the difference between the two. And again, what's nice with PyCharm is it will tell you, especially with the syntax errors, what's wrong and where it's wrong. which is really nice because if you're writing a large program and let's say you're at 500 lines of code and you go to run it and there's a syntax error, instead of going through 500 lines of code, PyCharm is going to show you, hey, the error's on 243, and you're looking up, I have a space that I shouldn't have, or I didn't add a parenthesis that I should have added, or whatever it's telling you that you need to do. So that's why I also tell people, I like using PyCharm and I recommend that they use PyCharm. Alrighty, thanks for watching this video and I'll see you in the next one.